Good day, campers. Today I'd like to talk about troubleshooting the electrical system in your RV. There are three types of power in an RV. One is AC, or alternating current. This is the same as the power in a sticks and bricks home. Most just call it electricity. The second is DC, or direct current, which is the same as the power in your automobile. Most just call it battery power. The third is propane or gas. The first is the one we'll be talking about today. A very important note here. In order to troubleshoot the electrical system, you will need a multimeter. This is a multimeter. It's called a multimeter because you can use it to test AC voltage, DC voltage, and resistance. They're not very expensive. They're available on Amazon, and an absolute necessity if you're going to spend very much time in your RV. A couple of other little testers that are kind of handy to have. They're specialized, and they are also available on Amazon. This is a GFCI tester. Basically, you just plug it into your outlet, and these indicator lights tell you if that outlet is working and or wired correctly. This is also fairly inexpensive. The third one is kind of a handy tool if you don't happen to have an EMS. I recommend having one anyway, but this is pretty handy. This is an outlet tester for the outlet in the pedestal where you actually plug in your RV. They are available in 50 amp and 30 amp. I have a 50 amp coach, so I have the 50 amp tester. I will link to all three of these meters, testers, in the description of this video. Warning, this is a fairly long video because there are a lot of possible failures in the RV electrical system. You can fast forward past the parts that don't apply to your situation, but a little patience will pay off in the end. I have section titles, so watch for those while fast forwarding. The electrical system in an RV consists of a number of components. First is shore power. This is the power that is provided by the RV park's pedestal. It can either be 30 amp or 50 amp, depending upon your RV. This video deals primarily with shore power. Second is generator. This is a gasoline, diesel, or propane-powered device that generates electricity. It can either be on board or portable. Third is an inverter. This is a device that converts 12 volts DC into 120 volts AC. It usually powers one or two other devices, but can power more depending on the size of your battery pack and the inverter itself. The most common use for an inverter is to power a residential refrigerator. Now that you know the parts of the system, what they do, we can talk about what can go wrong and how to fix it. There are three basic types of failures. First is the device failure. This is when only one of the things that uses electricity is not working. This is not actually an electrical problem, but just the failure of one device. Next is a partial failure. This is where some number of devices are not working. It could be one leg of a 50 amp coach, one circuit in your circuit breaker box, or the GFCI circuit in your coach. The last one is a total failure. This is where there is no electricity available anywhere in the coach. Now that you know what the electrical system is and what can go wrong, let's get into some actual troubleshooting. Let's say you get up in the morning or come home from shopping or whatever, and you notice your RV refrigerator is off. The first thing you need to do is see if it's just a problem with the fridge, or there's a partial failure, or your entire electrical system. To do this, let's check some of the other things that use electricity. Do you have the time displayed on the microwave? Does the TV come on? Plug in your outlet tester, if you have one, in some of your empty outlets. These two lights, based on the chart on the meter, say that this outlet is working correctly. If you do not have an outlet tester, you can use your multimeter and do the same thing, which also says this outlet is working correctly. Does your microwave have power? Is the clock lit? Does your TV have power? Our particular TV has an indicator light that tells us the TV has power. If not, you can turn it on. Turn on your coffee pot and see if it works. The whole idea is to determine whether you have just an issue with your refrigerator or if you have a bigger problem. Let's troubleshoot a partial failure first. A partial failure is usually one of three things. Could be your GFCI circuit, a tripped breaker for a single circuit, or one leg of your 50 amp service is missing. If the things that are not working are only plugged into outlets, it could be a tripped circuit breaker or the GFCI outlet is tripped. The easiest and simplest thing to check is a tripped circuit breaker. Are any of the circuit breakers tripped? If they are, reset them. If it trips again, then you have something plugged in that's causing a problem. If it resets fine, then watch it and see if it trips again. Go ahead and stop. To see if it's your GFCI circuit, find your GFCI outlet. There's usually at least one in the bathroom. It could be connected to other outlets, like the one out by your wet bay, or the ones in the kitchen, somewhere in the vicinity of the sink. Again, if you have an outlet tester, you can plug it into the outlet that says it's working correctly. You can trip your outlet. That says we do not have power on our GFCI outlet. Reset it. It's now good. We know that it's good. If you do not have the outlet tester, again, you can use your meter. Partial failure in a 50 amp RV. If you have a 30 amp coach, this really does not apply to you. So fast forward to the heading that says complete failure. If you have a lot of things in your coach that are not working, but you also have a lot of things that are working, you may have one leg of your 50 amp service not working. You could have a partially tripped breaker inside the coach or a partially tripped breaker outside at the pedestal. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to test our main breakers coming inside at the main circuit breaker panel. So you're going to want to measure between the neutral bar and your two main circuit breakers. We have 120 volts on that circuit breaker, 120 volts-ish on that circuit breaker. If one of these does not read 120 volts, while it's unlikely, it is remotely possible that one breaker tripped without the other. So you would reset these by shutting the breaker off, waiting a second or two, turning the breaker back on, and testing it. If that still does not restore power, we want to find out where we're losing power before we actually start replacing circuit breakers. All right, so you would go to your pedestal and look for a tripped circuit breaker. Right now we're someplace where we're using power from a house. but I will show you the breakers in the next segment. Does your EMS show that you have power? If you don't have an EMS, of course, it won't show power. This shows no errors. Line 1, 123 volts. Line 2, 122 volts. So according to my EMS, I have power on both legs. My power cord has 2 LEDs. They are both lit. If you don't have an EMS, then you can use an outlet tester. This one shows that it's correct. Any other light lit means you have some kind of a problem. According to Progressive, in order to use this outlet tester, you'll want to turn the breaker off, plug in the outlet tester, and turn on the breaker. Also, if you have a 30 amp coach, this outlet tester is also available in a 30 amp version, as is the EMS. This test really should be done with 2 people. One person to hold the meter and the access panel for the pedestal. In this case, for convenience, I've removed the access panel for the pedestal. Normally, you would not need to do that. The other person using one hand for each lead to test the outlet. Now, the inside of the 50 amp outlet is much larger than my meter leads. And in fact, in my case, my meter leads won't reach. So I'm very, very carefully going to insert a small flat-bladed screwdriver into neutral. These are the 2 hot legs, and this is the ground. Black is return, red is hot. I'm going to insert a second screwdriver into this leg, and then I can check from ground to neutral. I have 120 volts. From neutral to the other hot, is also 120 volts. This is what you want to see on a normal, correctly operating pedestal. Now, just to play it safe and make sure we don't have an open ground, I'm going to measure from ground to one of our legs, and we have another 120 volts. We also want to do the same thing from leg to leg, just as a double check. This should be something around 240 volts. But be sure to change the scale on your meter. So we got 259 volts. That is excellent. So we now know that both legs are good. If one leg is bad, be sure to contact the RV park and have the pedestal fixed. This is the most common failure. Depending on what happened inside, if you had power inside the coach, or let's say if you did not have power inside the coach, but you had power at the pedestal, that means you're losing power somewhere between the pedestal and the main circuit breaker. It could be a problem with your cord. You can remove the cord and use that same 2-person procedure that you used at the pedestal to verify you have power at the cord. If you have power at the cord, then you're losing power somewhere between this outlet and your circuit breaker panel. It could be wiring. If you have an onboard generator, it could be your automatic transfer switch. If you run your generator and you have power and you turn your generator off and you still don't have power, then the transfer switch could be stuck or defective. All right, so you would go to your pedestal and look for a tripped circuit breaker. Right now we're someplace where we're using power from a house, but I will show you the breakers in the next segment. Does your EMS show that you have power? If If you don't have an EMS, of course, it won't show power. This shows no errors. Line 1, 123 volts. Line 2, 122 volts. So according to my EMS, I have power on both legs. My power cord has 2 LEDs. They are both lit. If you don't have an EMS, then you can use an outlet tester. This one shows that it's correct. Any other light lit means you have some kind of a problem. According to Progressive, in order to use this outlet tester, you'll want to turn the breaker off, plug in the outlet tester, and turn on the breaker. Also, if you have a 30 amp coach, this outlet tester is also available in a 30 amp version, as is the EMS. The easiest way to test your plug is with 2 people. One to hold the meter and the access panel, and the other person to actually test the plug. I will show testing both the 50 amp outlet and the 30 amp outlet. First, the 50 amp outlet. The inside of this 50 amp outlet is much larger than my meter leads, and in fact, the contact is deeper than my probe will reach. So I'm carefully going to use a flat blade screwdriver to give me access to the contacts. This is a hot leg, this is a hot leg, this is ground, and this is neutral. First thing we want to do is measure from each leg to neutral. And we should see somewhere around 120 volts. And we're going to measure from the other leg to neutral. Again, 120 volts. We also want to confirm that we don't have an open ground, and we will test from a leg to ground. The last test we want to make is we want to check from leg to leg. This is kind of a double check to make sure everything's working correctly. Change your meter to 750 volts and measure from leg to leg. And that should give you around 240 volts. So that's the 50 amp outlet. Next, we'll test the 30 amp outlet. We will not need the screwdrivers for that because my meter will reach. So this is ground, this is hot, this is neutral. So we're going to measure from neutral to hot. Should get around 120 volts. And then we want to measure from neutral to ground. This proves we don't have an open ground, and I have 120 volts. If any of these test poorly or not correctly or less than 120 volts, then you'll need to contact the RV park and have the pedestal fixed. If you do have a good pedestal, if you have power at the pedestal, but you don't have power inside the coach, we need to figure out where we're losing power. The next step is we would check our main breakers coming in. If you have a 50 amp coach, you'll have 2 breakers. If you have a 30 amp coach, you'll have a single breaker. If there's power here, then you're losing it somewhere in the circuit breaker panel. If there is no power here, then you're losing it between the pedestal and the main breakers. Could be your power cord. You can use the same 2-person procedure to test for power at the end of the power cord. If you have power there, but not inside at the circuit breaker, then you're losing power somewhere inside the coach. It's either a wiring issue or your transfer switch on your onboard generator is either stuck or defective. I believe I've covered most of the common issues that can go wrong with an electrical system in an RV. The things that I have not covered are probably seldom occurring, Very, very rare, and probably a candidate for an RV technician. Thanks for watching, and I hope I help you locate and fix your problem. And as always, please subscribe